The Blocktalk podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Blocktalk podcast with me, Brian Welsh, and Jax Bruce. Jax, how are you? What have you been up to?
I'm good, Brian. I had a pretty quiet weekend. Had a couple of friends round for dinner on Saturday night, so that was nice. And surviving the storms that we're having at the moment. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Me too, surviving the storms. But I'm moving house soon, so it's been pretty full on over the weekends. Thanks for that. Okay, right. So today we have the pleasure of talking to David Reid. David is the Deputy Chief Executive for James Gibb, and he's transitioning to CEO in April later this year. David has been in the industry since 1999, and he started his own company, Life Property Management, back in 2003. Life at the time was one of the fastest organically grown property management companies in the history of Scottish factoring. Now, David tells us that James Gibb is the fastest organic and manufactured growth company in Scotland. He joined the PMAS in 2012 and today is their immediate past president. David, it's great to speak to you as always. How are you doing?
Doing well, one day at a time, as I always say, and thanks very much to both of you for inviting me along to speak today.
Okay, cool. No, it's great to have you on, and thanks for agreeing to do it. So, James Gibb has been going through a restructure. Can you tell us about it and the reasons for doing it?
Yeah, obviously we had two large organisations come together in 2019. We then 6 months later integrated the two companies together. So we put a heavy focus on brand, and the brand is driven by culture, driven by values. People look at values as words, but for certainly our board of directors, each of them has a meaning, and often, certainly from my past experience, and I was in business myself for the best part of 17 years, that what I was quite shocked to see was the lack of emphasis that's put on and priority that's put on culture, values, aligned to the brands. So from that line of thought, that everything we do and everything we say is very much brand associated, we looked at the structure of the organisation. We looked at how best that we can deliver back the service delivery model, and literally with the three key objectives of being number one factor of choice, number one employer of choice, and obviously the most obvious, which is financially sound.
Okay. And so culture within the business, is that the same culture you had in LPM, or is it different now?
No, it's a combination, because both companies had similar values. I mean, the values will always be the same. I mean, they will come from the leaders, and they have to be designed through an organisation. I live my life through 5 key words, which people will laugh because so many people hear them. Even my own daughters say, "Oh, here we go, Dad," and it's fair, reasonable, rational, manners, and respect. Now, there's a number of words that can be designed round about that, which has created the values of our organisation. And as I said, it's not just a statement of words. It's got to have meaning, and it has to infiltrate through an organisation. And so we've had to align them through the new if you like, which is obviously James Gibb Residential Factors. The brand of LPM was taken across there. The name of James Gibb remained. So it's about making sure everybody's aligned to the same common journey.
Yeah, I get that. We've spoken to a number of people, and it's the behaviors, isn't it? So you've got the values, but you've got to have the behaviors within the organization that back up those values.
100%, Brian. The behaviours are key to it. You know, you think back as there's been many statements that I've heard, and I think Frank Dick, who was the chief coach at for the European Championships back in the 80s. I loved his quote. You know, when you think about learned behaviours, and he made the statement, when I was 14, my dad was so ignorant I could hardly stand in the same room as him. And he went on to say, when I was 21, I was astonished how much he'd actually learned in the last 7 years. And that statement is all about us all learning what the right behaviour is. And going back to that statement I made at the beginning about everything we do and everything we say, whether it's internally, externally, will go back to your brand and go back to your organisation.
Yeah, no, I think leadership and management of businesses has changed dramatically, even in our business lifetime. You know, so yeah. And you are roughly the same age as me, although I'm sure you claim to be younger. But anyway,
the difference between myself and you, Brian, as you well know, is I dye my hair grey to make myself look older. Yours is just naturally grey.
Just to get some grey in the boardroom, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, we might even let Jax leave that one in. Okay, so 1999, how did you get into the industry?
Good question. Actually, at the time, I had just come out the back of the public sector in the NHS and was working at Legal and General and Commercial Property Management. I had a flat in the West End of Glasgow, and I joined the Residents Association and Committee, and they were intent on changing the property manager at the time, and they interviewed various property managers, and they came in one after the other, and I sat, if I'm being honest, quite aghast that if that was the best that we had in the industry, that what I saw was a niche. So believe it or not, in the strategic mind that I've got, I then spent 1 year, applied for a job with another well-known Scottish factor, worked for them for 12, 13 months, and then took a gamble along with someone who was working for that organisation at the time, and they set up Life Scotland, which ultimately became Life Property Management, and it was designed on, the brand was the circle of life where everyone was in it together. It started with 3 people all in it together, and as it grew, that whole logo and brand association continued with it. But what I did do was identify, like any organisation, and what I would see in it as just an opinion, an industry was very dated, had an opportunity for someone to bring in a organisational model delivery, product delivery that was customer service orientated. And if anything, and believe it or not, I can be quite humbled by, when I look back over the years that Life Property Management was in existence, that actually that concept was why it made it the fastest growing organic company in the history of Scottish factoring. And it's not a sales pitch, it's just a factual statement. So, and I do believe that's aligned to all the things that we talked about earlier, how you make sure that you're a factor of choice, how you make sure you're number one employer of choice and get the balance between the 3. And the only way you'll do that is to create a culture and an environment that people want to be part of, because you could sit in the ivory tower and say that it was me that made that a success. No, it was the people I had round about me that made that a success. I was just orchestrating the whole thing. So yeah, that's how I found myself into the world of residential property factoring.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I doubt your industry is much different to mine. Finding good talent at this precise moment in time is very, very difficult. Yeah, I mean, it really is a kind of almost an employees kind of market at the moment, and yeah, we certainly have struggled to find good people, and I'm sure you guys find the same.
Yeah, and it's about identifying how, you know, it's well known. You know, you've probably heard some of the stuff that's come out of ARMA and IRPM as well, where you know, I think there was figures quoted like 40% turnover in staff, and it's a difficult. I always make the statement to people when they first come into the industry. It's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. I love it because every day, you know, after, you know, I think that's 22 years now, and there's a new challenge. There's something new that you have to go and research, or you have to go and pick up your knowledge base on, and that just keeps it going. You know, and I need to be challenged constantly. That's you know, and I know, I've always made the statement that there's nothing that you're going to learn in a day that you're likely to do so without listening. And that's a big part of that. So, you know, yeah, making sure that you've got the right people, and when you do get the right people, it always again, reminding me of a philosophy that I took right from the outset, and that is that you can teach people property management, but you can't teach them basic values and customer service delivery. If they come with values and customer service delivery, then if you teach them property management, they'll be the best property managers in the industry. And I'd like to say over the years that some who we had a 2% turnover in staff in 14 years, I think it was the best record. And those that moved on, you know, I manage a football team, and I say the same thing, that I've done my job if someone goes on and plays at a better level.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Actually, we had Malcolm Perryman on here from the IRPM a few weeks ago, and he was talking about a survey that went out to the IRPM members about, you know, people who were going to stay in the industry and things like that. And I mean, it was an eye-opening report that he read, that he put together. Yeah, I used to have my first boss ever in life said something to me once. I'm not sure I wholly 100% agree with it, but I do to a certain degree, and that is, you can change someone's technical. This is a technical software company. You can change someone's technical ability, but it's very, very difficult to change their personality and their attitude. So, you know, finding someone who has the attitude for that sort of role and teaching them the job is by far the best way about it.
Yeah. And do you know what's it's a good point as well, but because we've just, one of the things that we've just recently introduced is a personality, you know, testing exercise for our senior leaders, and it's all colour based. It's quite an interesting concept, and what it does do is match up the colours, because everybody's got different personality traits, and it's about finding the right balance within an organisation. And, you know, I can identify that mine is sometimes a lack of patience and reading documents, but if you surround yourself with people who actually do that and do it very well, then that's a balance within an organisation. And at every level, not just at senior leadership level, you know, every level, you need that empowerment and that autonomy, because the best ideas for any of the organisations that I've been involved in over the years comes from the people who are right at the front end of it. So it's that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on the kind of personality assessment sort of profiling stuff. I did this about 18 months ago, because I have a business coach who I've been speaking to for about 18 months, and he introduced me to Clifton, which is from Gallup. I don't know if you've come across it.
Yeah.
And it's again one of these things that kind of there's 34 themes in Clifton, and it kind of tells you what your go-to ones are, your top 5, your top 10, and I was so taken with the tool, and I wish I'd known about it years ago. The one thing it did tell me was that I'm not very good with people, but anyway, that's another story. But the one thing that I was so taken with the tool that I actually did I did the coaching course, and I'm a certified Clifton coach now, and we roll it out across our business. And whenever we take someone from first interview to second interview, we assess them as well. Now it's not cheap to do either. So it's for people that you're maybe not going to employ, but it's to see how they'll fit into the team. And these sort of things, because you obviously need tons of different strengths and abilities within one team, and there's no point in having 10 people who are completely alike, you know. So I find these things invaluable nowadays. Yeah,
yes, totally agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, you've been involved with the PMAS since about 2019. How's that going, and how have you found it?
Do you know, I at the outset, and I've openly stated this, that when life property management was growing, I wanted to be that person that was doing something different and would stay away from it, because at the time I looked at it without commenting and said it wasn't a place that we wanted to be. And by round about 2012, I got invited along to some of the conferences, and the information exchange that I had missed out on over a number of years through that decision was quite frustrating for me, because it was a decision that I had taken ownership of and had got wrong. So entering into the Property Managers Association and being in council, you could see that was a platform that could be developed further. And there was a good team on council, some real good, strong past presidents. And for me, and again, it was my own objective, was that had to the identification of that brand had to be further developed at the highest level, and be recognised that if the industry was to lose that poor reputation, that we had to find ourselves onto a number of platforms, and roll forward a good number of years. What we find ourselves, and currently, obviously, the current president, Nick and Alison McDermott, has been an absolute godsend throughout that whole journey for me, from being in council to becoming president in 2018, through to 2019 to 2021, which actually, when you actually think back upon that era, I dealt with the tragedy of a business partner that passed away in tragic circumstances. I dealt with COVID-19, and then, just to put the icing on the cake, along came the cladding crisis. So that was quite an interesting 2 years as president. As past president, I'm still working with Scottish Government on the cladding parliamentary working group for cladding at the present moment. And that's the type of platforms that we found ourselves on. The structure of the Property Managers Association councils changed dramatically as well now, where financially, the board report details everything operationally from financially at a glance before you get into a council meeting on a quarterly basis. You know exactly what's going on within the organisation, and it is really now starting to become a very sought out voice within the construction industry, I have to say, beyond the factoring industry. Because one of the biggest things, again, that I recognised, I always say that the understanding of factoring in our society is probably our biggest challenge. People buy a house and they pay their council tax and they expect to have everything available to them. So along comes a factor and says, right, okay, you have to pay for, whether it's an open space site, you have to pay for the landscaping, you need to pay for X, Y, and Z. Well, if you owned a house that was sitting in its own location, you would pay for the landscaping to make sure it's cosmetically good and it adds value to your property. Similarly, with blocks of flats, it has to be insured, it has to be cleaned, it has to be maintained. You have to carry out improvement works, and a lot of the time there's that missing link. We always say that in the world of residential property factoring, that the downsizers, people who are downsizing into flats, need educated on factoring. People who are first-time buyers need educated in factoring. Somewhere in the middle there's people who have had the experience of it and understand it better. So we as an industry need to get that out there. There's things that we're looking at, similar to what you've done here in terms of podcasts. That's something that's been tabled recently, even to the extent where what's been tabled is adverts, but not to sell property management as the way we would do as an organisation, but to educate the society in Scotland as to what freehold, tenure and factors is all about. So I went off at a tangent there to your question. I appreciate, Brian, as I normally do, but the Property Managers Association will be a huge part of that going forward in the future, and the platforms that we've found ourselves on and the ears that are now listening is quite significant.
Excellent. No, because I think it is that education process, isn't it? Because and gone are the days where you buy a new house and the council adopts all the work that needs to be done of it. I mean, that's been long gone, and someone needs to pay for it. And you're right, you buy your own house sitting on its own. You need to pay someone, or do the work yourself to keep it looking good and keep the value of business of your property.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point you've just made is, I stood at AGMs over the years and I made that very statement, is that, gone are those days where the council would adopt it. But what has to happen now is developers have to obviously pay 25 years of an annual service charge up front for the councils to even consider adopting it. And in that particular scenario, some of the councils are unable from a resource because of the memento over the years of the build programme. So they will now turn to private property management companies to maintain these areas and make sure that, as I said, that the end goal is that we're there to manage it on behalf of the homeowners and ensure that the value in which they purchase their property is sustained, if not improved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so is there a project that's interested you most across your career?
That's a great question. I've been involved in many projects over the years, and narrowing that down was quite interesting. And I don't know if it's just because it's live. I've been through the scenario of the buildings insurance changes over the years, the title reform bill. You've had the Property Factors Act, and the challenges for many organisations that brought, which I'm a great advocate of, because it gives organisations guidance, and it is a gap analysis for organisations. However, I would say the current crisis that we're in has been probably the most challenging that I have ever encountered in any form of property, whether it's public sector, commercial or residential, and that is the external wall system crisis, which obviously I'm be attending a webinar very soon and be speaking about, setting the scene from the journey that we've come on as residential property factors throughout that, and realising that being on the parliamentary working group for this, the unintended consequences of freehold tenure in Scotland and what that has placed on this crisis, the amount of stakeholders that are involved, from UK Finance to the Law Society Scotland, the impact across the industry, home builders, is significant. So it is the hottest topic at the moment, but probably the biggest challenge that this industry has ever had to deal with.
Okay, and I take it you envisage it running for many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, you listen to you listen to what comes out of Westminster, and then you've got obviously the Scottish Parliament and what they're doing, and it's difficult because there is no easy way, because there's legislation challenges. Obviously, Property Managers Association was calling for some primary, secondary or amended legislation to try and drive forward the unintended consequence of freehold tenure, driven by, in many cases, the apathy of homeowners within large-scale developments to understand. And when I say apathy, I mean it with the greatest respect. They do not realise what their obligations as a duty holders for the development are, and making sure that they have to play their part in solving this. But so far, the Scottish Government are taking it in the right direction. It is a slow process. The pilot stage of this for 25 developments has led to people finding their way through the crisis. But I can see an end result that maybe isn't as far off as we think it is, but still a lot of big barriers as a result of freehold to come.
Okay, that's very interesting. So when you think about the future of property management, what do you see?
Again, great question. I said earlier on, the toughest thing remains is the education of society and their understanding of property factoring. So obviously had and still does to a degree have a bad reputation, which can be sometimes pinned at the door in terms of how organisations deliver their service model. But there's opportunities here from Property Managers Association Scotland, from the Property Factors Act to be able to mould and design it and have an influence in designing it the way in which we all want to see it go. Talked about the campaigns, not to sell factoring organisations, but to educate as to what the industry is and what our challenges are. All too often you walk into AGMs, and just as recently as last night, an online AGM where it was a frustration by one particular homeowner who lacked understanding of the legal system, the deed of conditions, and felt that these barriers are not barriers as such, that these obligations that were been driven by the property factor, when actual fact it was been driven by the legal document that serves their development. We need to continue the stakeholding partnerships. We need to reflect upon who the customer base is, and I often say that the customer for me isn't just the homeowner, the home builder. It's the suppliers that you use, and it's your colleagues, because every part of how you interact and relationships you build is very much going full circle back to our first conversation, and that's to do with how you approach your own life and your own values, and how you direct that into your organisation and those teams that surround you, that make your business work, that make your industry work in terms of Property Managers Association Scotland. So I'm a bit frustrated, if I'm being honest, that during the time that I was president, that there was, I went through as I linked earlier on, the tragic circumstances of a business partner. I went through a selling an organisation, or selling off the best part of an organisation. I went through COVID-19. I went through the cladding crisis, and I just feel as if I've got a lot more to give, and I'll continue to give that to the Property Managers Association through working on council for as long as they want me to.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I mean, I suppose a number of things that have come out in other kind of podcasts for people in the industry was that it's hugely difficult if you've got a flatted development of 100 flats. It's hugely difficult to please 100 people all of the time. So it's it's not the easiest job in the world, but certainly educating homeowners before they become homeowners would seem like the way to push this. Yeah.
100%. It's the way. It's the way of the future for me. That is my opinion. But we need to do an awful lot of work on that, and then it will actually have make people customers, and all the customer base I talked about. If the more understanding that you have, then the easier the journey will be for everybody concerned.
Okay, so one final question for me before we let Jax in with hers. If you did have the power to change one thing across the industry, what would it be?
That is a really good question, and that's a left field one, isn't it? What would I change? I literally would. That's a great question, and one that stumped me. And I don't often get stumped, but I would say it is.
Well, I've never heard you speechless before in my life, anyway.
No. I'm scared that I'm labouring the point here, and I'm going to repeat myself. But the one thing that has to change in this industry is the perception of the industry, and only the industry leaders and those who have got the ability to be able to educate society on what residential property management and factoring is. But when we do that, we have to make sure that the service delivery and the customer service delivery in which we approach this is done the way you would expect to in a customer service delivery environment. And if we can get, and that is a big challenge because it's not just our industry, it's many industries, but we can do that through platforms like the Property Managers Association. And over the years, many people reflected upon the Property Managers Association as a members forum that was a closed shop, and I can't comment on that. I wasn't a party to it. All I can say now is it's very different and very transparent and open to being able to go on that journey to improve an industry that still needs significant improvement.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Okay, so Jax is going to pitch in at this point and ask her 3 quirky questions.
Yes.
Who came up with that phrase, the 3 quirky questions?
Quirky questions, I know.
Was that you, I think?
It's a quirky answers I'm worried about.
Yeah, so this is the fun bit, David. So what's your biggest failure across your entire career, and what did you learn from it?
Do you know, great question. I'll answer this. I'll give 2 statements in response to that. Failure, when you look at the word failure, it's not the opposite. It's not the opposite of success. It's part of the success. So I have had many failures over the years, and I often talk about. Just yesterday, I was speaking to someone and I said, you make a mistake and you learn from it. You make a mistake a second time, someone will ask, really? And if you make it a third time, you're in the wrong industry, the wrong job. You should maybe seek alternatives. Failure is something that we can avoid by doing, something that we can avoid by doing nothing and saying nothing and being nothing. So I think that statement on its own gives an answer to failure. And my greatest failure actually was in a different career. The greatest failure I had was in the football field. As a young player, round about the time when you would be getting picked up to play at the highest level you could. And my lack of belief and confidence in my own ability was what held me back. And when I started to mature and grow confidence, I found myself ended up playing at semi-pro level, but at 24 years of age. And I would say that failure to believe in myself, and not in a cocky way, not in an arrogant way, but in that self-belief that at times in the early days of life property management could have held me back, and I reminded myself of the opportunities I've missed. I finished off my career playing football at that semi-pro level, led one team for 9 years, 5 years as captain, and ended up finishing up at Clydebank. And many people have told me that I should have played at a higher level, and the only thing that held me back was the failure to identify that if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything.
Yeah, good advice. It's sometimes can be a tough thing to do for some people, believing in we're our own worst critics, aren't we?
100%, and it's just about. I mean, I've read some things, and I always never thought I would actually come out. These words would come out my own mouth, but I've listened to some podcasts about meditation and taking time out, and at that point you've just made, Jack, it's a great one, because people out there would answer that and say, well, you don't know my circumstances, and likewise, I don't know the very low places that I've been in over the years. When things weren't going well, you thought you were about to lose everything. But there's only one person that can pull you through that, and you can go and seek people who can advise you, who have been there. And if you listen to them, if you're prepared to listen, there is always a solution to a problem.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be easier to find than others, and you just mentioned meditation there. It's a great thing for clearing the mind, and something that I think they should be doing in schools as well to help kids get into that habit from a young age and cultivate that awareness and self-belief, and to knock out those. Something that I've been kind of working on is, I think as women as well, we're very guilty of saying I can't do that, and I'm retraining my brain to say I'm just learning. So when I'm trying something new, I try not to to beat myself up if I can't do it, and I'm just reminding myself that if it's something new, then of course I can't do it, and which is a nice little twist.
You've just reminded me of two quotes there, Jack, that again, that people who know me have heard so many times. When I was asked a question about, stepping in and starting your own organisation, I read a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, and there was a phrase, can't tell you what the rest of the book said, but I remember this one phrase, and it said, "Ships are safe in the harbour, but ships were not built for that purpose." And you can stay in that harbour and you can float about and you maybe survive and it'll maybe not sink, and or you can just put yourself out there, just go for it, believe you've got the ability to be able to go that extra mile. And again, another nautical quote that I've used in the past as well, and that is that you can't change the direction of the wind, but you can adjust the sail to suit.
Yeah, nice. I like it. Good. So if you ruled the world for a day, what would you do, David?
I would start a political party that is purely based on people, and it would be called the Fair, Reasonable, Rational Manners and Respect Party, because
wow.
if everybody could actually apply those 5 common values to their life, and if you think about everything that happens in the world today, you could pick holes and say every part of that has one or all of those values missing.
Yeah.
So that would be, making a difference in life. The most number one priority. I always try and find a balance. People say, how do you find the balance in your working environment? That's because I put my family, my friends, and my kids number one priority. It doesn't matter what I'm working on, that everything gets dropped and I go and deal with that first.
Yeah.
And that learning that we talked about, you touched on there, Jax, in the schools. You can put your kids in any school in the land and expect them to learn the rights and wrongs. That learned behaviour comes from the people that they look up to, and provided you get that right, your own behaviour right, that'll resonate and feed through how they conduct themselves, and that then gets applied to an organisation. So it's the same basics, it's the same rules, and it all comes back to values.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something that's distinctly lacking in politics, without going too much into it.
I don't know if I could do politics. You asked me a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could.
No, absolutely.
I had my first involvement in politics through the cladding scenario, and I'm not so sure it's my.
Yeah.
I think I wear my heart on my sleeve too much.
Yeah. No, it's not a bad thing. So when you're 70 and look back at your life, what will you be glad you did, or will you feel proud of, either something you've already done or something that you want to do?
The one thing that I'll be proudest of is whether it's my kids, colleagues, team members, friends, industry. If I've said something, made a statement, had an action, taken accountability, responsibility and ownership for my own behaviour, and that's had an influence on any one of them, I'll happily take that. Not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game.
Yeah. How will you know that? Do you think someone would tell you?
That's a good point, Jackson. And do I need someone to tell me? I would like to think that people have said, how do you feel? Somebody might react badly to that. But every decision that I've ever taken has been based on what I believe in my heart is the right thing to do. And if your heart and your passion to do the right thing, and not that I'm now plugging James Gibb's new logo, doing it the right way. We don't always get it right. We're still working through to make sure we get it right. But if you do apply that to everything you do, then you'll get some form of reward. I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in this. And as I said, hopefully someone out there does think you've made a difference. Some people disagree with all the stuff I've said, let's be honest. Some of it might be controversial, but it's all meant with the greatest respect to everybody that I've interacted with over the years. And I even stretch that as far as Brian Welsh.
We almost got to the end. We almost got to the end.
And the fact that we're on audio and I don't get to see the fact that I thought one of the questions would be about how you dealt with the pandemic, and my answer right at top level would be enjoyed the photograph I seen of Brian Welsh wearing his pink slippers in his house with his shorts on, which was a great sight.
I don't remember that. I don't think I would have been in shorts or any pink slippers. Very good. And I doubt, well, I'll let Jax keep that one in, but never mind. Listen, David, that's been absolutely fabulous. Thanks for coming on and kind of giving us your views on all of that. That's been really, really useful. If anyone wants to get in touch with you or talk to you about any of this, can you give us some details of how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, more than welcome. They can contact me via directors@jamesgibb.co.uk. Happily, whether it's about factoring or about life in general, then yeah, I'm more than happy to speak to anyone. If there's anything I've said that assists or is questionable, again, quite happy to have a conversation.
Good, thanks very much for that. You can also find David on LinkedIn. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, David.
Yeah,
thanks for coming on.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks very much for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed that.